quiet nights begin. Imagine arriving in a new country where the nights are so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat slowing down, then speeding up again. No car horns. No neighbors talking loudly outside. No familiar sounds that once told you where you belonged. Just you, a small unfamiliar room, and silence stretching out like a thin blanket over every thought. That was my first night in America. And it was also the first night I understood something unexpected. Silence can make you feel scared and curious at the same time. It can push you away and invite you in all at once. You might think silence is peaceful. But when you are tired, confused, and quietly asking yourself whether your English is good enough to survive here, silence feels different. It feels like a question that no one says out loud. It asks, "Are you really ready for this?" And in that moment, you are not sure you know the answer. That night, I lay on a strange bed, staring at a perfectly white ceiling, listening for anything familiar. There was nothing. America welcomed me with complete quiet. These were the quiet nights I would later learn to love and hate at the same time. Back then, I had no idea those silent nights would become my first real English teacher. Your brain hates uncertainty. When there is no noise outside, it turns inward and starts digging through every worry you have tried to hide. I began thinking about the next day. How would I talk to people? Would I have the right words? Would my pronunciation sound strange? Would people see me as someone who did not belong? Those questions ran in circles inside my head, like a playlist you cannot turn off. At that point, I had studied English for years. On paper, in textbooks, through exams and grammar rules. But lying in that quiet American room, I faced a simple and uncomfortable truth. My English had never lived. It existed only in my head. It had never walked out into the real world. And the silence of that night pointed directly at that truth. Have you ever wondered why nights in America feel so quiet? Part of it is city planning. Houses spaced far apart, traffic rules that reduce noise. But a bigger part is culture. People respect personal space. They respect other people's rest. No one explains this to you directly, but everyone follows it. And when you are new, you have to learn what is never said. You learn it through observation, through feeling, through English that lives between the lines. I sat up and opened the window a little. Cool air flowed in. The climate felt different here. Drier, colder, calmer. That difference woke my body up in a strange way. Science tells us that when the environment has fewer distractions, the brain becomes more aware of what is happening inside. In simple words, when the world is quiet, you are forced to listen to yourself. And that is when I heard my inner voice say, if you want to survive here, you have to use English. Slowly, imperfectly. I tried speaking a few sentences out loud, very softly, as if I might disturb the silence. My name is, then I laughed at myself. No one heard me. No one judged me. It was just me and my English, awkward like two strangers sitting in the same room. In that moment, I realized something important. The quiet nights in America were not demanding that I be fluent. They were simply giving me space to begin. Maybe you are not in a quiet place like this. Maybe your world is loud and busy. But the feeling might be the same. You want to learn English, but your motivation keeps slipping away. You start a video, listen for a few minutes, then stop. Not because you are lazy, but because your brain is tired. It is tired of trying too hard. Sometimes, the problem is not a lack of effort. It is a lack of silence. In a noisy life, English has no room to breathe. And what you might need is not more information, but a small, safe moment of quiet where English can exist without pressure. That night, I did not study new vocabulary. I did not write notes. I simply sat there and let very simple English sentences float through my mind. It's quiet. I'm here. I'm scared, but I'm trying. They were short sentences. Honest sentences. And for the first time, English did not feel like a subject. It felt like a whisper. Psychology research shows that when you talk to yourself in a safe environment, without fear of judgment, your brain learns faster and remembers better. In other words, when you are not afraid of making mistakes, language starts to grow naturally. The quiet nights in America gave me that safety without trying. No audience. No correction. Just exploration. Before falling asleep, I thought about something surprising. Maybe I would not love America for its noise or its energy like in the movies. Maybe I would love it for moments like this. Moments where you are allowed to slow down. Allowed to be wrong. Allowed to start again with the simplest sentences. And if you are listening to this story, maybe you're in your own version of a quiet night. Not necessarily at night. Maybe it is a phase in your life. A pause. A feeling of being lost. But what if that silence is not empty? What if it is preparing you for a different way of learning English? A way that is gentler, more real, and begins exactly where you are. Why silence hurts. Silence does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it hits you like a question you were not ready to answer. After a few nights in America, I started to notice something strange. The quiet was no longer just quiet. It was heavy. It followed me from the dark bedroom into the bright mornings, into empty sidewalks, into conversations that felt too short and smiles that felt polite but distant. Silence, I learned, can hurt when you do not yet know where you belong. You might expect homesickness to come with tears or obvious sadness. Mine came as silence. Long pauses. Empty evenings. Moments when I wanted to say something, anything, but did not trust my English enough to let it out. And so I stayed quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because every sentence felt risky. Your brain is wired to avoid pain. When it senses danger, even social danger, it pulls you back. Speaking a foreign language feels dangerous in a subtle way. You worry about sounding stupid. You worry about being misunderstood. You worry that people will lose patience. So your brain offers a simple solution. Stay silent. It feels safer. At least for a moment. In America, that choice blends in too well. Silence is normal here. People do not fill every gap with words. They respect pauses. They do not ask personal questions right away. On the surface, this feels comfortable. But underneath, it can make you feel invisible. Back home, noise meant connection. Someone was always talking. Someone noticed you. Here, silence gave me space. But also distance. I remember standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at rows of cereal boxes. So many choices. So many words. I wanted to ask an employee for help, but my mouth stayed closed. What if I said the wrong thing? What if they spoke too fast? I stood there longer than necessary, pretending to read labels, letting silence make the decision for me. That was not confidence. That was fear wearing a calm face. Psychologists talk about something called avoidance behavior. When a situation creates anxiety, we avoid it. The problem is avoidance feels good in the short term but makes fear stronger in the long term. Every time I chose silence over speaking English, my fear grew a little deeper. My comfort zone became smaller. And the quiet nights, once peaceful, started to feel lonely. You might recognize this pattern. You plan to practice English, but you wait until you feel ready. You listen more than you speak. You understand more than you respond. And slowly, silence becomes a habit. Not because you want it, but because it feels easier than pushing through discomfort. What made it worse was the contrast. During the day, America was efficient, organized, and polite. At night, it became still. Too still. There were moments when I missed the background noise of my old life more than specific people. Noise had meant life continuing around me. Silence felt like life was paused, waiting for me to do something. That pause forced me to look inward. And what I saw was not just fear of English. It was fear of losing myself. Language is not just a tool. It is identity. When you cannot express your humor, your opinions, your emotions, you start to feel smaller. Silence shrinks you if you let it. There is a scientific reason for this. Humans are social learners. Our brains release chemicals like dopamine when we connect with others through communication. When communication is limited, motivation drops. Energy drops. Learning feels harder. So if you feel unmotivated to practice English, it might not be because you are lazy. It might be because you are isolated. One evening, I noticed something about myself that surprised me. I was thinking more in my native language than ever before. In my head, I was fluent, expressive, emotional. But the moment I imagined speaking English, everything slowed down. The contrast hurt. It felt like living two lives, one rich and loud inside, one quiet and careful outside. That pain almost made me give up. Almost. Because pain also carries information. Silence was not telling me to stop. It was showing me where the blockage was. It was pointing directly at the place where fear and language met. I began to understand that silence hurts most when it is chosen out of fear, not peace. There is a difference between quiet that rests you and quiet that hides you. The first heals. The second slowly drains you. So I made a small decision. Not a dramatic one. Just a shift. Instead of trying to sound smart in English, I aimed to sound present. One sentence. One moment. One interaction at a time. I started saying simple things. Even when my voice shook a little. Hi. Thank you. Have a nice day. These were not impressive sentences, but they broke the silence. Each small interaction gave my brain proof that speaking did not equal danger. Nothing bad happened. No one laughed. No one walked away. The fear did not disappear, but it softened. And with it, the silence began to change shape. The nights were still quiet. America did not suddenly become noisy. But the quiet no longer felt like rejection. It felt like space. Space where I could hear my progress, however small. Space where English could slowly grow. Without being forced. If you are listening to this and feeling stuck, ask yourself an honest question. Is silence giving you rest, or is it protecting your fear? If it is the second one, you do not need to fight it loudly. You just need to interrupt it gently. Because silence only hurts when it stops you from becoming who you are trying to be. And once you understand that, it stops being an enemy. It becomes a signal. Climate changed me. Most people think climate is just about weather. Hot or cold. Rain or snow. But when you move to a new country, climate quietly rewires how you feel, how you think, and even how you learn a language. I did not expect that. I thought English would be my biggest challenge in America. I was wrong. Climate got there first. The first winter surprised me. Not because it was extremely cold, but because it felt different. The air was dry. The sky looked whiter. The silence felt sharper. Back home, cold came with noise, people complaining, streets staying busy, life pushing back. In America, cold arrived politely, calmly, almost emotionally distant. And my body reacted before my mind understood. You may not realize this, but your brain is deeply connected to your environment. Research shows that temperature, sunlight, and humidity affect mood, energy, and memory. When the climate changes, your learning habits change. 2. In those early months, I felt slower. Words came out more carefully. I listened more. I spoke less. Not because my English got worse, but because my body was adjusting. Spring felt like a negotiation. Some days were warm, some days suddenly cold again. People talked about the weather constantly. Nice day today. Cold again, huh? These simple sentences were everywhere. And slowly, without pressure, they became my first real spoken English in daily life. Climate created small talk. Small talk created practice. Practice created confidence. Then came summer. Bright. Open. Social. Parks were full. People smiled more. Conversations lasted longer. I noticed something interesting about myself. I spoke more English in summer without trying. The longer days gave me energy. The sunlight lifted my mood. Science explains this too. Sunlight increases serotonin, a chemical linked to motivation and learning. My English did not magically improve. My willingness to use it did. Climate does that. It changes how safe you feel taking risks. In warm weather, mistakes feel lighter. In cold weather, silence feels heavier. During winter, I stayed inside more. I watched videos. I listened. I practiced quietly. During summer, I spoke. I interacted. I tested myself. Without planning it, my learning followed the seasons. America taught me that climate is regional, not just national. Each place felt like a different country. In one state, people rushed. In another, they moved slowly. In some places, weather was unpredictable and people joked about it. In others, it was stable and life felt structured. With every move, my English adjusted its rhythm. When it rained for days, I noticed my thoughts becoming more introspective. I wrote more. I listened more carefully. Rain created focus. When the sky was clear and blue, I spoke more casually. My sentences became looser. Climate shaped my personality in English before I even noticed. There is a psychological concept called embodied learning. It means your body influences how your brain learns. Language is not just words in your head. It is breath, posture, energy. When the climate changed how my body felt, it changed how English came out of me. Cold made my voice quieter. Warmth made it open. At first, this frustrated me. I wanted consistency. I wanted my English to sound the same every day. But slowly, I understood something important. Native speakers are inconsistent too. Their tone changes with weather, mood, and energy. My English did not need to be stable to be real. It needed to be responsive. Climate also taught me new vocabulary naturally. Not from textbooks, but from experience. Words like chilly, humid, dry air, heat wave. I felt them before I spoke them. That made them stick. The brain remembers language better when it is tied to physical sensation. When you feel cold and say, "It's freezing," the sentence becomes alive. There were days when bad weather made me miss home deeply. Gray skies triggered memories. Silence felt heavier again. On those days, English felt far away. And that was okay. Learning is not linear. Climate reminded me of that. Some days are for growth. Some days are for rest. Instead of fighting those slow days, I used them differently. I listened more. I repeated softly. I let English exist without performance. Climate gave me permission to slow down. And slowing down did not stop my progress. It protected it. One afternoon, during a quiet fall day, leaves covering the ground, I realized something had changed. I was describing the weather to someone in English without translating in my head. The words came naturally, shaped by experience. That moment felt small, but it was a turning point. Climate had trained my language through repetition and feeling, not effort. If you are learning English and feeling inconsistent, look around you. How does your environment make you feel today? Tired? Energized? Calm? Restless? Instead of judging yourself, adjust your expectations. Use quiet days to listen. Use energetic days to speak. Let your learning breathe with the climate around you. America did not just change my English with grammar and conversations. It changed it with seasons, with light, with silence. Climate did not rush me. It taught me rhythm. And once I stopped resisting that rhythm, English stopped feeling like a struggle and started feeling like something I was growing into, one season at a time. Culture shock daily. Culture shock does not arrive in one big dramatic moment. It arrives quietly in small daily scenes that confuse you just enough to make you doubt yourself. In America, I did not wake up one morning and think, this culture is different. I felt it when someone smiled at me but did not continue the conversation. I felt it when, "How are you?" did not actually mean, "Tell me how you feel." And I felt it most strongly when silence showed up where I expected connection. Back home, culture lived in closeness. People stood near each other. They talked over one another. Conversations overlapped and flowed without clear endings. In America, conversations had edges. They started politely and ended cleanly. People respected time, space, and personal boundaries. At first, I misunderstood this as coldness. It took me a while to realize it was simply a different kind of care. This difference hit my English learning in unexpected ways. I had learned English through dialogues full of emotion and explanation. But real life here was full of short exchanges. Good morning. Have a nice day. Take care. Simple phrases. Light tone. Then silence. My brain kept waiting for more. like waiting for the second verse of a song that never comes. Your brain is a prediction machine. It constantly guesses what will happen next. When culture breaks those predictions, your brain feels uncomfortable. That discomfort uses energy. And when energy is spent on confusion, there is less left for language learning. That is why culture shock feels exhausting, even when nothing bad happens. I remember my first conversation with a neighbor. We stood outside, the weather was nice, and everything seemed friendly. After a few sentences, the conversation ended naturally. Or at least, naturally for them. I stood there a second too long, wondering if I had said something wrong. I had not. I just had not learned the cultural rhythm yet. In America, silence often means respect. It means I won't invade your space. But when you come from a culture where silence can mean distance or discomfort, your emotions interpret it differently. This mismatch creates stress. And stress, according to neuroscience, reduces working memory, the part of your brain you need to process language in real time. That explained why my English sometimes disappeared in simple situations. It was not vocabulary loss. It was cultural overload. My brain was busy decoding behavior, tone, and timing, leaving little space for grammar. Culture shock also changed how people reacted to my English. No one corrected me directly. No one interrupted. At first, I thought they did not care. Later, I understood they were being polite. In American culture, correcting someone publicly can feel rude. So silence again played a role. Helpful silence, but confusing silence. This taught me an important lesson. Not all feedback is spoken. Sometimes, feedback comes through repetition. If people understood me, they responded naturally. If they did not, they rephrased. That rephrasing became my teacher. I learned English by listening to how people adjusted their language around me. There were moments when cultural misunderstanding felt painful. Jokes that did not land. Stories that felt too personal. Emotional reactions that seemed too much. I learned that American communication values clarity and positivity in public spaces. Heavy emotions are often saved for private conversations. This influenced how I spoke English too. I became more concise, more selective. Psychology calls this cultural adaptation. Your identity does not disappear, but it stretches. Language stretches with it. My English became quieter, but also sharper. I learned how to say less, but mean more. That was not a loss. It was growth. Daily culture shock forced me to become a better listener. I watched body language. I noticed pauses. I learned when to stop talking. Silence taught me timing. And timing in conversation matters as much as words. Slowly, culture shock turned into cultural understanding. I stopped filling silence unnecessarily. I stopped apologizing for pauses. I allowed conversations to end naturally. My English sounded more confident, not because it was perfect, but because it matched the environment. If you are learning English through stories like this, remember something important. Language does not live alone. It lives inside culture. When English feels hard, ask yourself if you are fighting grammar or fighting unfamiliar rules you have not named yet. Culture shock is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that your brain is learning deeply. It is building new patterns. That process feels uncomfortable before it feels natural. America taught me English not just through words, but through distance, politeness, and silence. And once I stopped resisting those differences, English stopped feeling like a foreign language and started feeling like a new version of myself, one quiet conversation at a time. English felt heavy. At some point, English stopped feeling like a language and started feeling like weight. Not a dramatic weight, not the kind that crushes you instantly, but the quiet kind that sits on your chest and makes everything a little harder to do. Breathing, thinking, speaking. I did not notice it right away. It built slowly, sentence by sentence. Hesitation by hesitation. During the day, I could function. I understood instructions. I followed conversations well enough. But every time I had to speak, something inside me tightened. English no longer felt curious or exciting. It felt serious, important, risky. Each word felt like it needed permission before leaving my mouth. You might know this feeling. You listen to English easily, but when it is your turn to talk, your mind goes blank. Not empty, just crowded. Too many options. Too many rules. Grammar whispers warnings. Pronunciation raises doubts. Your brain freezes. Not because it cannot speak, but because it is trying too hard to be correct. Cognitive science explains this simply. When your working memory is overloaded, performance drops. Speaking a second. Language uses working memory intensely. You think about vocabulary, structure, accent, reaction. When emotional pressure is added, fear of judgment, fear of mistakes, your mental system overloads. English becomes heavy because you are carrying too much at once. Living in America made that pressure stronger. English was no longer optional. It was everywhere. At the bank. At school meetings. At work. At the doctor's office. There was no practice mode. Every interaction felt like a test. And when everything feels like a test, motivation quietly disappears. I remember one evening, standing in my kitchen, rehearsing a phone call in my head. A simple call. 5 sentences. I practiced them again and again, trying to sound natural. When the call finally happened, the other person spoke faster than expected. My script collapsed. I answered with shorter sentences. Then silence. When the call ended, I felt exhausted, like I had just run a race. That was when I realized how heavy English had become. The weight was not just linguistic. It was emotional. English carried my survival, my independence, my ability to protect my family. That is a lot for one language to hold. No wonder it felt heavy. Many learners blame themselves at this stage. They think, I should be better by now. But progress does not always feel light. Sometimes, it feels like resistance training. Muscles hurt when they grow. The brain is not different. What made it harder was comparison. I heard others speak fluently, effortlessly. Their English flowed. Mine paused, stopped, restarted. Comparison drained energy faster than any grammar mistake. It made me silent again. And silence, as I had learned, can feel safe but isolating. There is a psychological term for this. Language anxiety. It is real. It affects memory, pronunciation, and confidence. The problem is not intelligence. It is pressure. And pressure does not motivate the brain. It shuts it down. One night, During another quiet American evening, I admitted something to myself. I was treating English like a performance, not a tool. I wanted to sound good, instead of being understood. That mindset made every sentence heavy. So I tried an experiment. I lowered the bar intentionally. I allowed myself to sound simple. I stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. I chose clarity over accuracy. Something surprising happened. English felt lighter. Not easy, but lighter. Neuroscience supports this. When you reduce self-monitoring, fluency improves. The brain speaks more smoothly when it is not interrupted by constant evaluation. Children learn languages this way. They speak badly, but freely. Adults forget this permission. I started using English the way I used my body when tired. Gently. With rest. With patience. Some days I spoke less. Some days I listened more. I stopped forcing progress. And without force, English slowly loosened its grip on my chest. The heavy feeling did not disappear overnight, but it changed shape. It became effort instead of fear. Effort is sustainable. Fear is not. If English feels heavy for you right now, pause and ask yourself one question. Are you trying to be perfect, or are you trying to communicate? Those are very different goals. One builds fluency. The other builds anxiety. America taught me this lesson slowly, through pressure and quiet nights. English was never meant to carry your entire worth. It is just a bridge. And bridges are built to be walked on, not admired. When I stopped carrying English like a burden, it stopped pushing back. It became something I could lean on instead. Still imperfect. Still developing. But no longer heavy. And sometimes, that shift is all you need to keep going. Love spoke softly. Love did not arrive loudly in my life in America. It did not announce itself with dramatic words or perfect sentences. It came quietly, almost shyly. Through small moments where English felt less like a test and more like a bridge. I did not notice it at first. I only noticed that speaking suddenly felt a little easier when someone was listening. With patience. When you fall in love in a second language, something strange happens. You stop trying to sound impressive. You start trying to be understood. Love has no patience for complicated grammar. It wants honesty. It wants presence. And that changes how language flows. I remember our early conversations. They were slow, simple, sometimes awkward. We talked about daily things, work, food, weather, routines. Nothing poetic. But there was warmth in those pauses. When I searched for a word and could not find it, I did not feel embarrassed. I felt supported. Silence stopped being heavy. It became shared. You might not realize how powerful that is for learning a language. According to psychology, emotional safety lowers stress hormones in the brain. When stress drops, learning capacity increases. Love created a safe space where my English could breathe. Mistakes were not failures. They were part of the conversation. I spoke more slowly. I listened more carefully. English softened. It matched the rhythm of connection instead of pressure. I did not need perfect sentences to express care. Sometimes a simple, "I like being here with you," was enough. And when it landed, when it was understood, confidence grew quietly. Before this, English had always felt like something I had to prove. With love, it became something I could share. That shift mattered. It changed my motivation completely. I no longer practiced English to survive. I practiced it to connect. There were moments when emotions became too complex for my vocabulary. Frustration, vulnerability, fear. Love pushes you toward deeper expression, and sometimes language cannot keep up. In those moments, I felt small again. But instead of retreating into silence, I learned to say, "I don't know how to explain this well." That sentence alone opened space. It invited patience. It invited help. Native speakers often underestimate how meaningful that sentence is. Admitting limitation is not weakness. It is communication. It tells the other person where you are. Love listens to that. Slowly, English absorbed emotional weight. Words stopped being abstract. They carried feeling. Miss you. I'm tired. I'm worried. These phrases became familiar because they were used honestly. Emotional repetition built fluency faster than drills ever did. There is a concept in linguistics called affective filter. It refers to emotional barriers that block language input. Anxiety raises the filter. Comfort lowers it. Love lowered mine without effort. English entered more easily because I wanted to understand and be understood. But love also brought challenges. Misunderstandings hurt more when feelings are involved. A wrong word could sound colder than intended. A joke could fall flat. Silence could be misread. Cultural differences became personal. Those moments were painful, but they were also lessons. They taught me clarity. They taught me to ask questions instead of assuming. We learned to slow down together, to repeat, to explain differently, to check understanding. Those habits strengthened both the relationship and my English. Communication became intentional, not rushed, not careless. I realized something important during this time. Fluency is not about speed. It is about connection. Some of the most meaningful conversations in my life happened in broken English. They mattered because they were real. Love also changed how I heard English. Tone mattered more. Pauses mattered more. I learned to listen beyond words. That sensitivity improved my comprehension everywhere else. At work, in public, in daily life. Love trained my ear. There were evenings when we sat quietly, not speaking much at all. But the silence felt different from before. It was not empty. It was comfortable. Shared silence does not block language learning. It supports it. It gives words space to grow naturally. If you are learning English and feeling stuck, ask yourself who you are speaking for. If the answer is to avoid mistakes or to sound smart, English will feel tight. If the answer is to connect, it will open. Love spoke softly to me in America. It did not fix my English. It did not remove fear completely. But it reminded me why language exists in the first place. Not to be perfect. Not to impress. But to reach another human being. And once I remembered that, English stopped feeling like a wall. It became a door. Sometimes hard to open. Sometimes heavy. But always leading somewhere meaningful. Marriage across cultures. Marriage does not simplify language. It exposes it. When love becomes a shared life, every small misunderstanding has a place to stay. In America, marriage did not just test my relationship. It tested my English in ways no classroom ever could. Suddenly, language was not only about expressing feelings. It was about solving problems. negotiating differences, and building a future together. Before marriage, silence could be romantic. After marriage, silence needed interpretation. Was it rest? Was it stress? Was it disagreement? In a shared life, unspoken words grow heavier. And when English is not your first language, that weight doubles. You are not only translating words. You are translating expectations. Cultural differences appeared in everyday routines. How to talk about money. How to disagree respectfully. How to show care during conflict. In my culture, emotions are often expressed indirectly, through tone or action. In American culture, clarity is valued. Say what you mean is more than advice. It is a rule. At first, this rule scared me. Direct language felt risky. What if my words sounded too harsh? What if I chose the wrong tone? So I softened everything. I delayed conversations. I hoped issues would fade. They did not. They waited. Marriage taught me something uncomfortable, but important. Avoiding difficult English conversations creates bigger emotional problems later. Silence stopped being protection. It became distance. There were moments when arguments felt harder. Because of language. I knew what I felt, but I could not express it fast enough. Emotions moved quicker than vocabulary. That gap created frustration on both sides. But frustration, when handled honestly, became a teacher. We learned to slow conversations down, to pause, to repeat, to ask, "Is this what you mean?" That simple question saved many arguments. It also improved my English more than any advanced lesson. Clarifying meaning forced precision. Precision built confidence. Linguists talk about negotiation of meaning. It happens when speakers adjust language to reach understanding. Marriage creates constant negotiation. And because understanding matters deeply, your brain pays attention. Learning becomes unavoidable. Marriage also introduced me to a new layer of English, emotional responsibility. Words have consequences. Saying, "I'm fine," when you are not creates confusion. Saying, "I need time," creates space. Choosing the right phrase became part of emotional maturity. American culture often separates intention from impact. "I didn't mean it that way" is not enough. What matters is how words are received. That lesson was painful at times. But it taught me to listen more carefully, not just to language, but to reaction. There were times when cultural habits clashed. I waited for signals. My partner waited for words. We both felt unheard. Slowly, we met in the middle. I learned to speak more directly. They learned to read pauses more generously. Language became a shared construction, not a personal burden. Science supports this experience. Emotional learning strengthens memory. When words are tied to important moments, they stick. I did not forget the phrases we used during difficult talks. They were anchored in feeling. Marriage also expanded my vocabulary naturally. Words like compromise, boundaries, expectations, support. I did not memorize them. I lived them. That made them part of my active English. There were nights when I felt exhausted, emotionally and linguistically. On those nights, English felt heavy again. But something had changed. I was no longer alone with it. We carried it together. Shared effort reduced pressure. Over time, my English became more honest, less polite, more real. Not rude, just clear. That clarity improved communication everywhere else in my life, work, friendships, self-talk. Marriage across cultures does not erase difference. It teaches navigation. Language becomes a map. Not perfect. Not always accurate. But useful. If you are learning English and afraid of deep conversations, understand this. Depth does not require complexity. It requires intention. Simple words spoken clearly can carry heavy meaning. Marriage taught me that fluency is not about smoothness. It is about responsibility. About choosing words carefully because they shape shared reality. In America, marriage did not make English easier. It made it necessary. And necessity, when supported by trust, turns pressure into progress. Family and children. Family changes the reason you speak a language. Before, English was about survival and connection. After children entered my life, English became responsibility. There was no pause button anymore. No time to wait until I felt ready. Life moved forward every day and English had to move with it. Children do not adjust to your language level. They adjust to the environment. In America, that environment speaks English naturally, constantly, without apology. School forms, doctor visits, parent meetings, playground conversations. Suddenly, English was no longer optional practice. It was the default. At first, this felt overwhelming. When you are responsible only for yourself, silence is still possible. When you are responsible for a child, silence becomes risky. You cannot stay quiet at a school meeting. You cannot hesitate during a medical conversation. You cannot say, "I'll learn this later." Later does not exist. What surprised me most was how children learned English faster than I did. They absorbed it without fear. They repeated sounds without embarrassment. They made mistakes proudly. Watching them was both inspiring and painful. Inspiring because it showed me what natural learning looks like. Painful because it reminded me how much fear adults carry. Science explains this clearly. Children's brains are designed for language acquisition. Their emotional filter is low. They do not protect their identity through perfection. Adults do. We are afraid of losing face. Children do not have that fear yet. Family life forced me to confront that difference. My children spoke English freely at school and sometimes corrected me at home. At first, that hurt my pride. Then I reframed it. Correction was not disrespect. It was collaboration. We were learning together, just at different speeds. Daily routines became language lessons. Breakfast conversations. Homework questions. Bedtime stories. English entered my life through repetition, not study. And repetition, when connected to care, is powerful. The brain remembers what matters emotionally. There were moments when I felt inadequate. When my child asked a question I could not answer clearly in English. When I misunderstood a school email. When cultural references slipped past me. Those moments triggered old fears. But they also pushed me forward. Avoidance was no longer an option. Psychologists talk about identity investment. When language is tied to your role, parent, partner, provider, motivation increases. Learning is no longer abstract. It is personal. English stopped being about me. It became about protecting and guiding my family. Children also changed how I spoke. I simplified my English naturally. Short sentences. Clear structure. Repetition. Guess what happened? My fluency improved. Simplicity is not weakness. It is efficiency. Native speakers do this instinctively with children. I learned it consciously. Family life also softened my accent anxiety. Children did not care how I sounded. They cared whether I listened, whether I showed up. That acceptance reduced pressure. Reduced pressure improved speech. It was a quiet loop of progress. There were evenings when we all sat together, switching between languages, mixing words, laughing at mistakes. Those moments mattered. They taught me that language does not have to be pure to be meaningful. Communication is not about correctness. It is about connection. America often talks about family values, but what I experienced was language values. Clarity, safety, advocacy. I learned how to ask questions, how to insist politely, how to speak up when something did not feel right. English became a tool of protection, not performance. Children also gave me a long-term perspective. Learning English was no longer a race. It was a journey alongside them. I did not need to be perfect today. I needed to be present. One night, after reading a simple English story aloud, my child looked at me and said, "Your English is getting better." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was accurate, but because it reflected effort, not perfection. Progress seen through love feels different. Family taught me something essential. Language grows where it is needed most. When English mattered for connection, safety, and love, my brain stopped resisting it. It accepted the work. If you are learning English and feeling pressure, imagine using it not to impress, but to care. To explain. To protect. To comfort. Those are powerful motivations. In America, family did not make English easy. It made it necessary. And necessity, when rooted in love, is one of the strongest teachers there is. Policies and pressure. Pressure does not always come from people. Sometimes it comes from paper, forms, letters, emails written in careful English that looks polite but feels heavy. In America, policies shape daily life in quiet but powerful ways. And for someone learning English, those policies speak a language that carries authority. I remember the first official letter I received. It was written clearly, logically, and without emotion. That made it harder, not easier. There was no warmth to lean on. Just information and responsibility. I read it 3 times. Translating slowly in my head, afraid of missing something important. This was not conversational English. This was survival English. Government systems in America are structured and rule-based. Appointments, deadlines, requirements. Everything has a process. When English is not your first language, every process feels slower. Not because you are incapable, but because understanding carries risk. Misunderstanding costs time, money, or opportunity. This kind of pressure affects learning deeply. The brain under stress prioritizes accuracy over fluency. You become cautious. You double-check. You hesitate. English stops flowing and starts freezing. I noticed this whenever I dealt with policies. My sentences became shorter. My voice became flatter. Fear tightened. Language. But pressure also creates growth. Policies force me to interact with systems I could not avoid. Banks, schools, healthcare, immigration offices. Each interaction added a new layer of vocabulary, application, eligibility, verification. These words were not optional. They were tools. What surprised me was how American systems responded to effort. When I asked for clarification, people often slowed down. They explained again. They rephrased. The system was rigid, but the humans inside it were flexible. That distinction mattered. It taught me not to fear authority, but to engage with it carefully. Psychology calls this stress inoculation. Small, repeated exposure to stressful situations builds resilience. Each form I completed, each phone call I survived, each appointment I navigated in English reduced my fear slightly. Pressure, when faced, became practice. At the same time, policies changed how I thought. American culture values responsibility and self-advocacy. You are expected to speak up if something is wrong. Silence does not fix problems here. That was a cultural shift for me. In some places, silence avoids conflict. In America, silence can delay solutions. Learning to advocate in English was uncomfortable. It required direct language, clear questions, firm but polite tone. I had to learn phrases like "I need clarification," "There seems to be a mistake," "Can you explain my options?" These were not emotional sentences. They were empowering ones. Pressure also revealed my limits. There were days when my brain felt full, when one more English task felt impossible. On those days, I learned to ask for help. Asking for help is a language skill. It requires humility and clarity, and it builds trust. Policies also taught me patience. American systems move quickly in some ways and slowly in others. Waiting became part of life. Waiting in English felt longer, but waiting gave me time to observe how language was used formally, tone, structure, politeness without emotion. I learned by reading between the lines. Over time, official English stopped intimidating me. It became another register of the language, different from daily conversation, but learnable. Once I understood the patterns, my confidence increased. Fear thrives in the unknown. Knowledge shrinks it. If you are learning English, you might avoid official situations because they feel too advanced. But those situations teach a specific kind of English that matters. Not flashy, not expressive, but powerful. America did not give me the option to stay in my comfort zone. Policies pushed me out gently but firmly. And, while that pressure was stressful, it was also formative. It taught me that English is not just about connection. It is about agency. Pressure sharpened my language. It forced precision. It demanded clarity. And in that demand, my English grew stronger. The lesson I took from this was simple. Pressure does not mean you are failing. It means the language is being trusted with responsibility. And that trust, once earned, changes how you see yourself as a speaker. Silence became teacher. At some point, I stopped fighting silence. I stopped seeing it as an enemy or a sign that something was wrong. Silence did not disappear from my life in America. It stayed, but it changed roles. It stopped hurting and started teaching. This shift did not happen suddenly. It happened quietly, like most important changes. One evening, after a long day of speaking, listening, translating, and thinking in English, I sat alone again in a quiet room. The silence felt familiar. But this time, it did not feel empty. It felt earned. Silence became the place where my brain organized language. Neuroscience tells us that learning does not only happen during action. It happens during rest. When you stop speaking, your brain replays. Conversations strengthens neural connections and consolidates memory. Silence is not absence. It is processing. Before, I had filled silence with anxiety. Now, I let it exist. I noticed how my thoughts moved in English without effort. Simple sentences formed naturally. Not because I forced them, but because they had settled. I started using silence intentionally. After conversations, I paused. I replayed what was said. What worked? What did not? Not with judgment, but curiosity. That reflection turned everyday interactions into lessons. Silence also taught me listening. Real listening. Not waiting to speak, but understanding. In American culture, pauses carry meaning. Silence gives others space. When I stopped interrupting that space, conversations deepened. People opened up. My responses became more accurate. There is a concept in psychology called active silence. It means being mentally present even when not speaking. Active silence increases comprehension and emotional awareness. Once I practiced this, English felt less rushed. I did not need to fill every gap. I also learned that silence protects energy. Speaking a second language is tiring. Without rest, burnout follows. Silence gave my brain recovery time. That recovery improved performance later. In learning English, constant input is not always better. The brain needs time to digest. Silence provided that digestion. There were days when I said very little. And that was okay. Those days were not failures. They were integration days. English settled deeper. Silence also changed my self-talk. Instead of criticizing mistakes, I observed them. Observation without judgment is powerful. It keeps motivation alive. One quiet night, I realized something important. Silence had been with me from the beginning. The difference was how I used it. At first, it reflected fear. Later, it reflected growth. If you are learning English, do not rush to escape. Silence. Learn to use it. Let it become your teacher. Let it show you what you already know. Let it give your brain space to grow. In America, silence healed me not by removing difficulty, but by giving meaning to effort. And once silence became a teacher, English stopped feeling like a struggle and started feeling like a skill I owned. Healing through stories. There is a moment in language learning when progress stops looking like improvement and starts feeling like healing. I did not notice it at first. I only noticed that I was less angry at myself, less rushed, less obsessed with sounding right. English was still imperfect, but my relationship with it was softer. That was when stories entered my life in a different way. Before, I used English to explain facts. After everything I had been through, silence, pressure, love, family, I started using English to tell stories. Not impressive stories. Not dramatic ones. Just honest ones. And something shifted. Stories do something grammar cannot. They organize experience. Psychology shows that the brain processes stories as meaning, not data. When you tell a story, your brain connects emotion, memory, and language into one system. That integration is deeply healing, especially when you have felt fragmented in a new language. I started telling my own story slowly in simple English. Where I came from, why I moved, what scared me, what surprised me. I did not try to sound poetic. I tried to sound real. And because the story was mine, I already knew the meaning. English only had to carry it. At first, I told these stories quietly, to myself, in my head, then out loud alone. Later, to people I trusted. Each time, the story changed slightly. Not because my English changed, but because my understanding deepened. Retelling was not repetition. It was processing. Neuroscience explains this well. When you revisit memories through language, the emotional intensity decreases. The memory becomes organized instead of overwhelming. In simple terms, telling your story helps your brain heal from stress. For me, English became part of that healing instead of the source of stress. I noticed that when I spoke through stories, my fluency improved naturally. Sentences connected. Transitions appeared. Not because I planned them, but because stories demand flow. You cannot pause too long without losing the thread. So the brain adapts. Stories also gave me permission to be slow. No one expects a story to be rushed. Pauses make sense. Silence adds meaning. That took pressure off my speech. Silence and English stopped fighting each other. They worked together. There was another surprise. Listeners responded differently. They leaned in. They asked questions. They shared their own stories. English became mutual. Not a performance, but an exchange. That reciprocity boosted confidence. More than praise ever could. I realized that many people learning English try to hide their story. They focus on neutral topics, safe topics, but neutrality keeps language flat. Emotion gives it depth. Depth makes it memorable. Telling my story also helped me accept my accent. My accent was part of the story. It carried history. It signaled movement. When I stopped trying to erase it, my speech relaxed. Relaxation improved clarity. There were moments when I struggled to find the right word. Instead of stopping, I described the idea differently. That flexibility is fluency. Stories train that skill because meaning mattered more than precision. Over time, I noticed that my inner voice changed. I started thinking in English during emotional moments. That was new. English was no longer only for tasks. It was for reflection. That shift meant integration. Therapists often say that healing happens when experience is given language. I lived that truth. English gave shape to what I had carried silently for years. And in return, those experiences gave English weight and authenticity. If you are learning English and feeling stuck, ask yourself this. What story are you not telling yet? It does not have to be big. It just has to be yours. Start with simple sentences. Let them be imperfect. Let them be slow. Stories do not demand perfection. They demand honesty. And honesty lowers fear. Lower fear opens the brain. Open brains learn. In America, healing did not come from mastering English. It came from using English to make sense of my life. Once I did that, improvement followed naturally. English stopped being something I chased. It became something I carried, gently, imperfectly, and with meaning. English as a companion, not a destination. For a long time, I believed English was a destination, a place I had to arrive at. Fluent, confident, correct. I imagined a future version of myself who spoke perfectly, and I thought everything would feel easier once I reached that point. But something important happened along the way. I realized English was never a place. It was a companion. This realization did not come suddenly. It came quietly, through daily life. Ordering coffee, listening to strangers talk, explaining my thoughts slowly, sometimes awkwardly. English walked beside me through ordinary moments, not just milestones. And that changed everything. When language is a destination, learning feels endless and exhausting. There is always another grammar rule, another accent to fix, another mistake to regret. But when language becomes a companion, learning feels supportive. English is no longer judging you. It is accompanying you. I noticed that my relationship with English mirrored my relationship with myself. When I was harsh and impatient, English felt heavy. When I was gentle and curious, English felt lighter. The language had not changed. I had. A companion does not rush you. A companion adjusts to your pace. Some days I spoke confidently. Other days I struggled to find simple words. English stayed with me in both moments. That consistency built trust. Trust is essential for learning. Neuroscience shows that the brain learns best when it feels safe. Fear narrows attention. Safety opens it. Once English felt safe, my progress accelerated without effort. I stopped measuring myself against native speakers. That comparison had always drained me. Instead, I measured something else. Clarity. Was I understood? Could I understand others? That shift brought relief. Communication became the goal, not imitation. I also learned to appreciate silence again. Silence between words. Silence while thinking. Silence while listening. In American culture, silence can feel uncomfortable, but it is also powerful. When I accepted silence as part of English, my speech gained balance. English became the language of my inner dialogue. Not all the time, but enough to notice. I would reflect in English. Encourage myself in English. Sometimes comfort myself in English. That was the deepest sign of integration. I realized then that English had witnessed my transformation. It had heard my fears, my hopes, my confusion, my growth. A companion knows your journey. English knew mine. Many learners ask, when will I be fluent? I no longer think that question matters. A better question is, when will English feel like mine? Ownership is more powerful than fluency. English became mine when I stopped trying to sound impressive. When I allowed my personality to shape my sentences. When I let my cultural background influence my expressions. Language is not meant to erase who you are. It is meant to carry you. There is freedom in accepting imperfection. Native speakers are imperfect every day. They pause. They forget words. They change their minds mid-sentence. Why should learners be different? By the end of this journey, I no longer saw English as a test I might fail. I saw it as a tool I could trust. A bridge. A mirror. A companion. And companions grow with you. As my life expanded, my English expanded too. New experiences created new vocabulary. New emotions created new expressions. Growth was natural, not forced. If you are listening to this story, learning slowly, maybe feeling tired or unsure, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are building a relationship. Treat English kindly. Speak to it often. Let it hear your real thoughts, not just rehearsed ones. Use it to describe your day, your memories, your dreams. Let it walk with you. One day, you will look back and realize English did not change you. It revealed you. It gave you another way to exist in the world. And that is not the end of the journey. That is the beginning of living fully, imperfectly, bilingually, and with confidence. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for listening slowly. Thank you for learning bravely. English is no longer ahead of you. It is beside you. If you are still here, listening to these final words, it means something inside you did not give up. And that matters more than perfect grammar, perfect pronunciation, or perfect confidence. This journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about finding your voice slowly, gently, in your own time, through English. Remember this. You do not learn English to sound like a native speaker. You learn English to express your real life, your real thoughts, and your real story. Every pause you heard, every simple sentence, every moment of silence was intentional, because that is how real learning happens. Quiet, deep, lasting. If this story made you feel understood, calmer, or more confident, even a little, then you are in the right place. This channel is not about rushing. It is about slow English listening, reading, and speaking practice that fits real life. Here, English is not pressure. It is a companion. Subscribe to the channel to continue learning English naturally through long, slow, meaningful stories. Like this video if you want more calm, clear, easy English content. Comment below, where are you learning English from and what part of this story stayed with you the most? New videos are waiting for you, stories that help you understand English deeply, speak with confidence, and think in English without fear. Do not rush. Do not quit. Just keep walking. I will see you in the next story.